Couple minutes after 7, so let's go ahead and get going. And start with a roll call.
Maria Ryan.
Here.
Gary Zico.
Here.
John Marlin. Aaron Petrie. Todd Rusk. Stephen Wald.
Here.
Okay, and yes, John actually did contact me earlier today to say that he was not going to be able to make it tonight. So, okay, well, it looks like we do have a quorum, so let's move forward. Are there any changes to the agenda? Okay, let's move on to the approval of the minutes from our previous meeting. Is there a motion to approve? Is there a second? Okay. Is there any discussion, any changes? Okay. All those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, those are approved. Okay, and we'll move to public input. Are there any members of the public that would like to address us this evening? And if you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Carol McCusick, 403 West University. Email address is rancorous, RANKCHORUS @gmail. I'm continuing on the same topic that I spoke to October 11th, and where I'm going with this is in favor of Public Works pursuing our recycling and rewards that do not interfere with citizens or business owners as citizens, having the knowledge of what's really happening in order to be collectively responsible for validating that this train to and of reprocessing is a positive activity. And would like to remind the commission that they could have a vote at the end of 5 minutes to extend the time, because what I think I'm going to do is read an answer that Bart Haxton, the Environmental Sustainability Manager, sent to me and copied Maria on, but not the rest of the commission. It answered all of the specific questions thoroughly, and to read through my question and his answer as far as I could get today, or should the council decide they'd like to hear the whole thing, seems to be as respectful of the material as I can be in 5 minutes. So just launching in, he says, Carol, I have attempted to answer some of your questions below in red. Please be aware that my answers are an attempt to answer specific questions you have posed and should not be applied to other circumstances outside of this discussion. I want to emphasize that the commercial recycling requirement the city recently placed upon licensed haulers requires them to offer recycling of multiple materials to commercial establishments, but does not require that haulers collect it commingled or collect it source separated. That decision is left up to each hauler. In addition, haulers will still be able to offer recycling services for fewer materials, such as cardboard only, so the city's actions have not outlawed source-separated commercial recycling in any way. The development of the commercial recycling ordinance was a directive from City Council to staff, and the process did not include much involvement of SAC, Sustainability Advisory Commission. Therefore, looking at SAC agendas and staff reports would not be very useful in your research. The most detailed information developed was presented to City Council on January 10th, 2011, and July 11th, 2011. You can access these documents on the city's Council's webpage. Okay, here are the and then I'm jumping to the place in where my questions and his answers start. First question Carol, put was, how much less than garbage does the same weight in mixed recycling per pickup cost? Just the ongoing cost, not the cost of the initial setup with containers, etc. Is there much more of a premium for ongoing pickups? Okay. Is there much more of a premium for ongoing pickups of a pure element than ongoing pickups of the equal weight in mixed recycling? And he says, each hauler providing commercial recycling services will decide upon their own service fees, so the cost will vary depending upon the hauler. In terms of the commercial recycling ordinance, the city will not be involved in the contractual arrangements between the various haulers and their customers, so the city will have no say in the rates.
Ms. McCusick, your 5 minutes is over.
Okay.
And I will turn, is there a motion to extend? There is no motion, so that'll be it. Thank you. All right, let's move along to our communications, to our staff report.
You have before you the monthly written staff report. I won't get into all the details, but we're still continuing with our residential energy audit and shell improvement program through the federal EECBG grant. We have seen an uptick in the number of shell improvement projects in the last few months, and it looks like that funding will be exhausted in early 2012. We're currently replacing some lighting. Last couple weeks they've been at the Public Works Garage replacing some old T12 lamps with magnetic ballasts, and now we have some T5 lamps with the programmed electronic ballasts. And just yesterday they started here at the City Building replacing some lights. They're currently replacing fixtures in the fire department apparatus bay with induction lighting. So we're trying some different types of lighting. We've got some LED lighting that's going to be going in here at the City Building as well. So we'll have some of those projects, and maybe we can even have a little showcase of those before one of our monthly commission meetings or something like that in the future. I pointed out a few locations where the city has installed LED streetlights on the update. Just that's something we hadn't discussed, and there were a few areas now where that is in place, including area at Crystal View Townhomes, area of Park Street and Goodwin Avenue near Provena, and also on Springfield Avenue between Cedar and McCullough. So we have LED streetlights there. We're continuing to evaluate the placement of LED lights whenever we undertake replacements, and I think we're specifically interested in also looking at some of the city's municipal parking lots as well. And then the final thing under staff report, continuing our discussion from the past couple months of municipal electric aggregation, I kind of wanted to update the commission on our efforts there. We have been continuing to meet and discuss the potential for aggregation to hopefully reduce residential electric bills, and also to potentially include some form of renewable energy in that. So Urbana, Champaign, Savoy, and even Champaign County, we've all been having meetings talking about this. As we discussed before, you have to have a referendum on a ballot approved by the residents of each municipality to allow the city to aggregate all of those electric accounts and go out to bid on them. Several communities in Illinois, all of those so far in the ComEd territory, have done this and are saving residents anywhere between 15 to 25% off of their supply portion of their electric bill, off the generation portion, excuse me. So the supply portion from Ameren is still the same. It would be the generation portion that you would be saving that 15 to 25% on. Residents under aggregation programs still get one bill from Ameren, so there's no two bills for them to pay, and Ameren is also the one they would still call if there was a problem with the lines, because Ameren is the one responsible for that service. So when a community places municipal aggregation onto the ballot, if it passes, it's basically an opt-out aggregation. So residents, every residential account within municipal limits would be placed into the program, but everyone would have the option to opt out if they so choose. And they would be given several opportunities to opt out, and they would be made aware of what the cost would be under the aggregation program, so they could directly compare the cost for their electric based on what they're paying now and what they would be paying under an aggregation program. So really that eliminates risk for people, so they can opt out on those certain times. And the reason why there's been several communities in the ComEd territory in Illinois and not in the Ameren territory that have done this so far was that it was basically a billing issue with Ameren before, as far as the alternate retail electric suppliers getting the account information from Ameren. So now those bugs have been worked out, so now they're able to go ahead with it in the Ameren territory. One of the consultants we spoke with is estimating that probably 100 to 130 communities in the Ameren territory in Illinois will be having aggregation on their ballot in March. So this is something that a lot of communities are looking at to help the residents save money. I don't know how many of them are looking at it from a sustainability aspect as well, but I know that certainly the commission here is, and I personally am, and so I want to make sure we at least include those discussions while we're talking about this. And I did some rough calculations as to what using green energy through municipal aggregation would mean for us here in Urbana, and if we were to go to 100% renewable energy by purchasing renewable energy credits, we could potentially save 25 to 30%, reduce our emissions 25 to 30% over what they currently are now. So certainly that's a big chunk. That's huge, and that would greatly change, I think, the landscape of what our future climate action plan might look like and the strategies that we employ, and certainly would position us much further down the road toward greater reductions than we otherwise would be. And I think these, if you look at the cost, for example, one of the communities in the ComEd territory that recently went out to bid for aggregation and had received prices on traditional energy versus green energy, it amounted to basically an additional $2 a month per household to go to the green using the RECs, so which is renewable energy credits.
Bart, is it $2 a month or $2 a year?
$2 a year.
Okay.
$2 a household a year. I'm sorry if I misspoke. So the cost very low to do that, and the emissions reductions would be much greater than I think. It would give us the biggest bang for the buck that we could hope for in getting those emissions reductions. I've been doing some more research. I know Gary has echoed some concerns about the renewable energy credits and wanting to find out a little more information on those, and I've been trying to dig up some more information there, And I think I sent the commission one of the links to the US EPA's Green Power Partnership, trying to explain how communities can claim emissions reductions credits for renewable energy credits. And so it kind of lays out some of the guidelines on how communities can do that. And it seems perfectly acceptable that communities can take emissions reductions credits for the indirect reductions that they create by purchasing RECs. So, you're basically, a renewable energy credit is basically buying the environmental property rights to 1 megawatt of power, and by buying that 1 megawatt through a green source versus it being produced through coal or some other type of traditional source, then you are basically driving the demand for green energy and reducing the demand for other forms of energy. So it is acceptable, and in ICLEI's protocols and everything that they've developed for accounting for greenhouse gas emissions and tracking reductions, communities do regularly take credit for those emissions reductions that they achieve through the purchase of renewable energy credits.
Other questions for staff? Gary?
On the memo, the way it's worded, I think could be a little bit clearer, because you said it would cost $2 household a year to go 100% renewable. But that's based upon an aggregation without the renewable. I mean, this still could be cheaper than what we're paying now. Is that not right? You would go for this package of an area residential retail electric supplier if the package was less expensive than what we're paying now. So we're paying this now. If we went with cheapest, we might get bid would be here. Getting it renewable pumps it up a tiny bit. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so that doesn't really come through on the memo, but
Okay.
Just to make that clear to people on the commission. And it was sort of interesting, because what they did in Oak Park too, they sort of had a second thought about that and said, okay, we're going to save so much money. Let's take a little bit of that and put it in a fund for other types of initiatives that we can do. And so they would be like taking a little bit of the savings. They'd still be saving money. That was not passed because they thought this was like a tax on the savings that hadn't been originally presented. So that's something to keep in mind if we want to, there's sort of a trade-off in how you present it so that people are encouraged by the savings, but yet maybe keeping the door open to the community taking some advantage of those savings as well. So that's just, it was passed like 66%, and I don't know what the other, my math is not so good, 44, 30, 34, good. I'd be interested to know what the other arguments were, because what's the downside from a resident of doing this?
Really, there is no downside, because even if you were to vote to approve municipal aggregation on the ballot, you personally would still have the chance to opt out if you didn't like the price when the bid came through. So, so from the way I view it, I don't see any negatives other than general, we don't want the government in our electric socket type of thought. Even though the municipal involvement is really just on the bidding end, you're still handling, we're not handling your electric accounts and things like that under an aggregation program. So, I think these referendums are largely passing based upon the pre-referendum education that is taking place, letting people know all of these details that we're talking about here, and making sure they're clear on them, and making sure that that they are aware that they have choice in the matter, and that I think there's 3 or 4 communities in Illinois that these referendums failed, and from what I've heard is that was largely the deciding factor. Was there wasn't a lot of coordinated education in those communities before the referendum, and I think in one of the communities it was also co-opted as an issue in a mayoral race, so that impacted the referendum as well. But otherwise, by and large, the other 20 or so communities that have had it on the ballot have approved it overwhelmingly.
Yeah, I mean, just for fun, this is it. This is it for Oak Ridge, according to the presentation. Shall the Village of Oak Park, have the authority to arrange for the supply of electricity for its residential or small commercial retail customers who have not opted out of such a program? That seems to be the...
That's the language that you
So
have to use.
it doesn't
yes.
say a whole lot without a lot of background and education on that, but it's just 20 words or so.
So did they or any other community go for a clean power package?
Oak Park did.
Okay.
Oak Park, I think, was the first one that has really looked at it from that angle. In addition to saving people money, also looking at the green power, and Oak Park opted for the 100% green power. So it can work, and they're making it work there. I think they've received a lot of interest there, and just last week Oak Park did a webinar just to educate other communities in Illinois that are interested in doing this same thing. And then back to Gary's point on the other thing that Oak Park looked at was making a municipal energy efficiency fund based upon a fee in the supply contract. It was turned down by the city council there because some of them labeled it as a tax, and in speaking with the staff at Oak Park, I think they felt like if they maybe had introduced that idea a little bit earlier in the process and educated people a little more about how that fund would be used and had a little more concrete plan as to how it might be used, then they might have been a little more receptive to it. But the way it was, people weren't clear as to what that fund would be used for. So I think that's certainly a possibility. I don't know at this point if that would be something that municipal leaders around here would want to look at or not, but I think certainly this commission can certainly have some input there.
Yeah, I have some questions. I heard someone describe that some of the values or the discounts that are achieved through aggregation are especially attractive when you match like asymmetric loads together. So if the demand pattern for the energy, if you're aggregating similar units that have a similar demand pattern, those don't qualify for the potential discounts that if you somehow coupled, just to make up an example, a large factory that only ran in the middle of the night with residences that only used energy in the day, thereby yielding an aggregate shape that was more constant. I'm just wondering if the kind of load factor was either especially was part of the conversation in Oak Park, was part of what made their bid attractive, and if that's part of the conversation on how this municipal aggregation processes are coming together.
I believe the statute in Illinois for aggregation allows for the aggregation of residential accounts and small business accounts. Now, the definition for small business isn't necessarily in the legislation. In ComEd, I think it's been viewed as up to 50 kW, but I believe in Ameren they're looking at up to 150 kW. So that would include places like your fast food restaurants, small establishments, things like that. So they would also be included, but the line there isn't exactly clear yet, and that's something that needs to be looked into a little more. And I think there's, from what I've been told, an administrative law judge is going to have to rule on where that line is. So that's still to be determined. But the larger industrial plants, municipal governments, we've already been able to aggregate, participate in aggregation programs. So the city of Urbana participates in an aggregation program. We get most of our electricity for all of our electricity for buildings from an alternate supplier. I believe our street light electricity still comes directly from Ameren. And industrial plants, they've been doing these aggregation programs for a long time, so this wouldn't be a new benefit to them to participate in a program like this, and I don't believe the way it's written that they would be allowed to, but I hadn't heard that exact argument that you suggested there, so I think I want to look into that a little bit more.
And, you know, do you, from your conversation so far within Urbana and with the other municipalities in the county, do you think, it sounds like there could be interest in having renewable power as one of the options, or as the option we pursue?
I think certainly in Urbana, our leaders have indicated that you know, green power is something we want to look at through this. I don't know as, you know, that commitment or you know, there's not that there's a commitment here yet, but there's at least interest. I don't know if that interest is applied across the board or not. I think there might be some interest across the board, at least in getting the pricing and looking at it, and seeing where that pricing ends up being in comparison to the traditional energy pricing, and then they can make a decision at that point, you know, do we want to make this transition or not? But I think it's at least part of the discussion at this point, and I think the positive press and things like that Oak Park has received recently for their efforts, I think that can only mean good things for what we're doing here.
Todd.
I think there's important to, you know, get more information and you know, answer all of the questions. But I think if everything, you know, if everything sounds as good as it is, it sounds like a great thing for us, and it sounds like something that we can do in the short term to really have an impact. So I guess I would, you know, with some conditions, I would say I'm supporting this, and I'm interested in hearing about you know, those 3 or 4 communities where the referenda failed. I'm kind of interested to hear about those experiences, because I'm imagining, okay, if we decide that we want to endorse this and make a push, we're looking at an education campaign, big time, I think. And you know, one thing that comes to my mind is, you know, just in terms of, you know, possible skepticism. You know, we can't track electrons, right? Like, so, but to the extent that we can put a face on what the aggregation, you know, like a green renewable energy credit, you know, to the extent that you can put a face on that, like, you know, it made this possible. And I know, you know, I don't know, but I'm guessing that, you know, there's a whole bunch of investment money that goes into a pot and stuff happens, and but you know, it just, I think it helps in convincing a lot of people if you can kind of see something concrete. So just an idea to throw in, you know, if we move ahead and, you know, jump into education and convincing people.
Aaron?
I was just curious, what impact is this going to have on our, we talk about the Kappa software, and I think that's what it's called, and all that stuff. What impact is that going to have in that model, do you think?
In the Kappa software, renewable energy credits are one of the options that is listed in there. So if you were to go and plug in to that sheet in the spreadsheet that you were going to use 100% REC-based energy, then it would spit out, you know, your reductions for you. So it's in the table there, and you know, previously when we'd been talking about it, we had looked at a combination of RECs and on-site renewable energy being generated here and there, and those, you know, those reductions were only going to get us so far realistically. But now, I mean, I think this is really a game changer if we were able to plug in a 100% number as to the implementation level there, and see what those numbers spit out. I didn't go back and plug those numbers into Kappa, but I did plug our estimated kilowatt hour usage under aggregation into the EPA's Green Power Partnership website, and that's where it spit out the numbers that I used in the monthly staff report. So, so just going to the Green Power Partnership and plugging in, they have a calculator, and plugging in approximately 180 million kilowatt hours a year, which would be roughly our load under aggregation for residential and small business, then it spit out that would reduce emissions by 111,000 metric tons a year. And it also gives you equivalence. Todd spoke about putting a face on it, so it also relates it to kind of real numbers that people can hopefully relate that reduction to. So reduction of 111,000 metric tons a year of carbon emissions would equal 21,800 passenger cars. The emissions from those, the emissions from 12 million gallons of gasoline consumed, 258,000 barrels of oil consumed, and on and on. So it kind of gives you some of those numbers that you might be able to use to help educate people as to what those reduction numbers would mean. So, so I think, so those numbers weren't exactly supplied from CAPA, but, we can certainly go back and plug those in, and I'm sure it'll be pretty similar to what the Green Power Partnership website spit out.
So one item that I don't know the answer to, but it's sort of a cautionary note on this. The way I understand the reason why there's a 25 to 30% discount in kind of going into the power market and getting a new contract is that the current energy prices were priced under longer-term multi-year contracts, and the price of power has been falling. So it's not necessarily the case. In fact, it's not the case that you can continually get 20 to 30% below Ameren's rate for decades at a time. It's more of a, maybe a 2 to 3 year or a 1 to 2 year phenomenon. So similarly, it just makes me wonder, I don't know the answer to this, but essentially how long will it be the case that you can get clean power as opposed to just generic grid power for so close to the same price? And what would the situation be in a year or two if all of a sudden there was a wider spread between those two prices? What would it be like, certainly for our climate plan or for the community to then switch back? And it's not necessarily the case that we could pursue this and lock in clean power for the life of our planning period, at least at a near equivalent price. So it's a cautionary note. I don't have all that filled in yet, but I would be curious at how, sort of some more data points, and to the extent people have crystal balls, what they think about the price spread between clean and regular power is likely to be in future contract periods.
That's a good point. The consultants we've been talking to have brought those concerns up to us. So when you're looking at your contract length, you need to have experts who can monitor energy pricing for you, be able to help you determine what the best length of your supply contract is, and also to include in your contract some language that reduces the risk to residents by doing aggregation. So two of the examples that they used were require your supplier to, if the default rate for Ameren comes down, that you require your supplier to meet that default rate if it falls below their rate. So that's one contractual way to do that. The other is to simply dissolve your aggregation if at whatever rate the default rate falls below your aggregation rate. So there's a couple ways to handle that. So you're basically eliminating the risk for people, so they know that their rate will always be the lowest, or it'll either be the lowest rate that supplier can give, or it'll be the lowest rate that Ameren can come back and give. So Ameren is the default supplier. If that supplier that contract ends, then Ameren automatically takes over those accounts. Maria?
But we would still be back to square one in terms of the emissions, potentially.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to get around to, but thank you for bringing me back to it. So you are right that the savings, Ameren is under some current longer-term contracts. So the biggest savings that would be found under aggregation would be in 2012 after aggregation, if it were approved. So those would be the biggest savings months, and then some new rates will go into effect in 2013. Now, we don't know what those rates will be at this time. They'll be announced in May of 2012, I understand. So when we go out to bid for this, we'll know what the 2013 rates would be and whether or not we want to contract, through that time period or what we want to do. But I think, since Ameren's locked into some higher rates, they probably wouldn't be a competitive bidder for the aggregation program in 2012. But they could be, if their rates come down in future aggregations, if you choose to go back, say you have a 2-year contract and you go back and rebid in 2 years, Ameren could actually be one of the suppliers on the aggregation program. And you could continue to include green power in that contract, whether you want to exclusively list it or you want to get bids on all forms of traditional or mixes of power up to 100% renewables. So you could get that pricing every time you go out for an aggregation. And so you can continue to do that. You are correct. I think the savings, we need to make sure that people understand that those savings, the 15 to 25%, that's not forever. But hopefully through continued aggregation, people will automatically be able to get a better rate than they can on the street just because we're aggregating so many accounts at one time, buying in bulk. So we should be able to continually get better pricing than the off-the-rack price that people can get.
Another way of answering your question, Steve, is if in fact the general pricing is down, you want to be short-term because you adjust. So there's no disadvantage to being short-term. If it was really going up, then you'd want to be long-term.
Right, exactly.
So this seems to be good. 2 comments on this. One is that if this happened, if we could become like Oak Park, that means that we wouldn't have any incentive as a city, as a community, to further reduce electricity because it wouldn't have any further impact on our greenhouse gas emissions. That's sort of curious. There would still be incentives in terms of energy reduction savings for paying for electricity. But that's kind of interesting because then it would shift our efforts toward gas, natural gas, which is used a lot here for heating, and liquid fuels for transportation. So that's sort of a nice deal where we still take care of the electricity and then we sort of go after the other things to further drive things down. I sort of like that because I think John Marlin said last time, well, if we do this, then there's no reason for me to switch out my incandescents for fluorescents, and it wouldn't be in terms of greenhouse gas. It'd still be energy savings for individuals, but it wouldn't do anything more to our emissions reductions. But that's kind of interesting. The other thing, I looked at the EPA link that you sent us, and I feel kind of better about the RECs reading this, if it's done right and you make sure that you're retiring those RECs and this type of thing. But number 7, I don't understand. And it says, an organization buying green power can claim to be reducing its carbon footprint, but cannot claim to be reducing its total emissions to the atmosphere. I don't know how many times I've read that. And I mean, there's more to it. It's a couple sentences before that. But so that's the one I have to get my brain about. Do you understand what they're talking about there?
No. I read that one several times myself, Gary, and it seems to be contradicted by some of the other points they make in that document. So I'm still not clear on that, but I think that's, since you brought it up too, that just verifies to me that I wasn't misreading it. So I think that's something I need to kind of check into a little bit and make sure what they're trying to say there.
And before it says you're reducing your indirect emissions, because it's not the emissions right on site, they're indirect, but still, it is reducing. Okay, yeah, I think it's just a little bit complicated. I think they're wrong about that. I hope so anyway. So we'll look into that.
Other questions? I do have a couple. I think, one is a little bit procedural. I assume that the method for getting this referendum on the ballot would be a city council vote to place it on the ballot?
Yeah, it looks right now like the city council on November 14th will hear information on this, and then hopefully if they agree that it's something worth pursuing, that then sometime in December an ordinance would come back before them for approval, because they have to pass an ordinance to get something placed on the referendum. That has to be done by January 3rd, I believe, is the deadline to get something on the March ballot in Champaign County. So that's the general timeline right now. Once it's placed for sure on the city council agenda, I'll verify that to you. But I think right now we are on the tentative schedule for November 14th. That's coming up rather quickly, I realize now at this point. So more information to them. We'll probably have a consultant come in and help us answer some of these questions that the council will have at that time. So that might be a beneficial to commission members to maybe attend that council meeting and be able to hear what that person has to say.
And I'm sorry, that was the one on the 14th?
14th, correct.
And the reason I asked was because I'm trying to figure out sort of what our role would be, and it sounds like with that timeline that we would not really have an opportunity to review and make a formal recommendation to the council on whether to put it on the ballot, that our endorsement would be something that would come kind of after the fact, as far as, I suppose, kind of an encouragement to to members of the public to vote for the referendum.
Yeah, there's a couple thoughts there. First of all, the city council itself can pass the ordinance, but they can't officially endorse aggregation, and they can't campaign for it. I mean, they can help educate, and so that will be partly my role to help educate people. So I think there's the need for some kind of pre-referendum educational committee to be developed, and who that would be made up of, and what their efforts would involve. I don't know yet, but I think there's certainly room for people that are interested in supporting this, or at least educating people, I should say, about this effort. I think there's room for those people to get involved. So, I don't know if this commission were to make a recommendation to council, what that should look like. I think we can have some discussions there, but I think if council decides to put this on the March ballot, then I think that process of education should begin probably right after the new year, and getting that information out to people. And if it ends up that the municipalities here are getting bids for both traditional and green power, then then maybe a recommendation from the commission might be that that they select green power if it's within so many percentage, such a percentage of the traditional energy price or something like that. So, so that that this commission is on the record as supporting the green energy, but you also realize that there's an economic cost to that.
Right. Well, I guess this is, there's kind of two questions I have. One is, as far as making a recommendation to council with regard to the form that the question would take on the referendum, would we have an opportunity to specify, that we would recommend that the referendum itself specifies green power, say within some kind of
the question itself is dictated by legislation, so you can't change the form of that question.
Okay,
so that's why.
Okay.
So you can't necessarily broaden it out and include all sorts of things, green power, everything else in the question. So the question on the ballot is laid out. It's clear. So So really, the point at which, you know, you start talking about green power and those things, or at least formally deciding on it, would be then after the referendum when you're going through the bidding process and selecting a final bid for the supply.
Gary?
But that means that the city is not necessarily bound to get the very lowest rate. They come up with something, people can opt out. So isn't that the case? So at Oak Park, they went on this little 0.2% higher kilowatt hour. They didn't have to ask the residents, the voters, if they approved that, right? They had the right to select a bid, and that's it.
That is correct. So in the case of Oak Park, they had two bids. One was for traditional energy, one was for green energy. The voters themselves were not asked, you know, whether or not they wanted green power, although they had done a survey asking people if they would support green energy, you know, if the cost was within so much of the traditional energy. So they had done a little bit of legwork to gauge public opinion on the matter, and that might be something worth considering. But no, the city council decided in that case that the green power cost was only 0.2 of 1 penny per kilowatt hour more than the traditional energy, and they decided that you know, that residents are still getting this much savings instead of this much, like the analogy you used earlier.
Yeah, okay.
As far as you had mentioned that there was this, the use of some of the money saved to fund some kind of municipal activities, and that people were not very happy about the use of those savings because they felt that that was not part of what was on the referendum. Because one thing that, of course, the thought that crossed my mind was this could become a funding source for getting a full-time person on your staff to promote sustainability programming. But if the wording is set by law,
That was
you know,
part
I
of-
mean, would that become?
Yeah, that was also part of the problem, and I didn't necessarily address that earlier in my response, but that was also part of the problem, that the question on the ballot is set. You can't tinker with that. So you know, there wasn't room to include that message. You don't want to muddy the waters too much before the referendum with too many messages. But then if you wait until after the referendum, then some people might say you were trying to keep something secret. So I think that's a delicate balance that you have to strike there in getting people enough information to make decisions, but not overwhelming them, but also at the same time making sure that they're aware of all the things that you were thinking about, including in the program. So, so in that case, in Oak Park's case, you know, the fee that would have created their municipal energy efficiency fund would basically be so many tenths of a cent per kilowatt hour that was stipulated in the supply contract. So so it's basically overhead for that supplier. So so when they're submitting their price for that contract, they know I've got to send so much, you know, per kilowatt hour to the city for this energy efficiency fund, and in their case, I think, you know, some people labeled it a tax, and you know, and they didn't have the concrete plan that I mentioned as to how to use it. So I think, you know, you'd need to do some of those things up front and make sure it was clear how you could use that, and but also the legislation that enables municipal aggregation does allow for communities to develop demand response and energy efficiency programs. So that is one of the things laid out in the legislation that they can tackle through aggregation, are those programs. So it is authorized by the legislation.
Are there any further questions for staff? Any other discussion or motions or? All right, thank you. This sounds very, very, very promising, and hopefully it will all work out well. All right, let's move along to our continuing business, our climate action plan. And of course, the draft that I sent out did not include this idea that, perhaps we're going to end up with our 25% target already in the bag if everything goes as one might hope. So I guess I would, sort of throw it out there after, this conversation that we've just had, that, perhaps, if we go forward with this kind of a plan, and in terms of defining our goal, we may want to come back and revisit that goal after we see what happens with the, both with the referendum and with the bid process. That would probably be sometime down the road. But I would certainly, over, what I sent out, want to change the wording on our target to include that idea, that if we made some, unexpected significant progress, that we would come back and try to set a more ambitious goal as a result of that. So having said that, I will just say that this, the draft is fairly rough. As far as the kind of low-hanging fruit strategies that Todd had pulled together, I simply put the spreadsheet in that went out last time. I mean, I know you were going to take some input and work on that a bit. Certainly in the section with regard to our baseline emissions and some of the data, again, I simply embedded the documents that we've already looked at. So those, that information hasn't really been integrated into the writing of this. But I just wanted to see whether this is the general direction that folks want to go, what changes want to put out there before digging into the drafting of the language any further.
I have a question on the. I apologize for not getting to my homework, Todd. I meant to get you comments on your proactive homework from last time. But would you object, or would the commission think it's a good idea, good direction to go on that? To right now, it's a list. It's a list that's culled from the CAPA software, and I think the CAPA software had at least quantities of greenhouse gases associated with each strategy. At least the quantities that it modeled were available. And I just wonder if we would want to take a run at throwing some columns to the right of the list that had those quantities and at least a rough estimate of potential cost, some scoring on ease of implementation or tracking, an estimate of sort of who would be responsible or something like that, responsible party. And just to try to go through that exercise to see if doing so, if the list held together, if things would drop off it, if it would suggest a prioritization instead of just a rote list, and if it would generate additional ideas. Trying to go through that exercise. It may be that we have such a lack of data that we just can't do it too. But those were examples, and I'm sure you guys could come up with other examples of how you might flesh that into more of a grid and a scoring to just make some incremental progress towards making it seem more real and more substantive.
I think we can. I think the CAPA software has enough information that we can add some, at least provisional or draft quantities to it. Ease of implementation, I think we can take a shot at that too. Who is responsible? I think that's. Pretty much it's residents' responsibility, business responsibility. And in maybe 1/1,000,000% of the time, the city's responsibility. In terms of the one thing that stuck out was when you said cost. I don't know. I might shy away from that a little bit. That can be harder. It can be hard to define. It's very situationally dependent, and sometimes even those things on the list can mean a lot of different things.
Yes, that's right.
But so that was the one thing where I might question a little bit. But all the other things that I think we can do all of that stuff.
Well, the reason and I agree that the sort of data burden on trying to fill in the blank on cost is huge. It's just so complicated to construct a meaningfully accurate greenhouse gas mitigation supply curve. You know, it's just, there's a lot of work that goes into doing that, and it's not done in a locally applicable way. But we do have as one of the principles in this draft anyway of identifying modest or no-cost items as the ones that we're recommending under Phase 1. And we may note at least over or under, $0. We have many things that we think, all indications are, save money as you implement them. And we can also, to some extent, predict that, well, some of these things incur cost as you implement them. And the cost, is borne by, fill in the blank. I mean, interestingly,
so in qualitative terms, right?
Interestingly, I would have put renewable energy at a cost, 2 months ago, much higher than apparently our near-term renewable energy costs are likely to be. Although I am nervous about the out years on that and whether that's going to continue to be an easy thing for us to do. I hope it is. But anyway, those are suggestions. So I hear your cautionary note on cost, and yet I think even if we just said fine, over or under, or with strong or lesser confidence intervals, or whatever, however we would do it, some measure like that.
Other comments?
I'm generally comfortable with the format of the report. No major concerns. One thing that I wanted to point out that I actually really liked was that you drew attention to the commission having some role or responsibility in responding to things that are projects or things that are on the plate of different units of government or questions, capital projects or other things like that. I think there's a role for us. I think it's important to discuss those kinds of projects in this context, and I think it's it would give some additional meaning to the kind of the work and the gatherings that we have here. So I appreciated that, and there may be even room to emphasize that even more.
Maria, can I
Steve, yeah.
build on that? Because I had to comment on that part too. That is a good list, and these are just questions because these may be incorporated in the bullets already there. Does capital improvement plan, does that include things like stormwater infrastructure?
Yes, typically.
Yeah, okay. How about electricity procurement or something like that? I mean, given this recent...
I don't believe so. I'm kind of fishing back in my memory from 15 years ago of being on council and seeing that.
Well, I'm not asking if it's on capital improvement per se, but do you think that's reflected in these bullets? Should we add a bullet for...
Oh, electricity, perhaps, yeah. I think especially with the discussion of municipal...
Because the city contracts for power and then community choice or municipal aggregation. And then the other two bullets I scrolled down here was downtown plan or other strategic plans.
Those are all good ideas. Kate's been doing some work in the past month on looking at the 2008 sustainability report and the efforts to date that were listed there. Certainly, we've had a lot more efforts in the last 3 years, and so I think she's identified some of the items that we can easily update here, and so I think within the next couple weeks, hopefully we can get you some information that will update that information, and some of it I'm sure will stay the same because maybe it was an action that was done prior and nothing's been done with it. But a lot of these are things that are ongoing and continuing to happen, and getting better all the time. And there's certainly new efforts too that should be included. So I think we can identify those and help slip them into this list. And we may not be able to necessarily identify a greenhouse gas emissions savings from that particular action all the time, but we can at least identify that these are the types of things that we're doing, and these are the types of things that will continue to bear fruit in the future, I think.
Great. That's fabulous. Other comments?
I mean, if this aggregation thing actually pans out and we can get green electricity, in a sense, why wouldn't that be our phase one? I mean, why wouldn't we try to really push that? And then phase two would be the non-electricity sources, natural gas and transportation fuels.
I think that would just be a different way of parsing up what constitutes phase one and phase two. That I think what we've been talking about is that phase one would be, kind of laying out some of the general principles, laying out our goals, our vision, that kind of thing. And then also, kind of taking advantage of basically acting on the things that are relatively easy to act on and move on, which I would include municipal aggregation as that. And then phase two is going to be kind of digging into some of the efforts that would be a little more difficult.
Right.
So.
But it's not even mentioned here, because, I mean, you said that this is.
Right,
somewhat
the
new,
next draft.
But I'd
plan.
like to really
Yeah.
try to highlight that, because it does
Yeah.
change the strategy. And there are things here too, like I was saying before, if you're gonna go with this Energy Star stuff, well, that's not gonna make any difference if we have 100%.
Well, think of it as risk management. I mean, what if your green power costs 30% more in 3 years?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I think the idea is to try to get this to council possibly in December, or, and I don't know that we're going to know the answer to a lot of those questions with regard to municipal aggregation and what the source will be and what the emission reduction will be until, if the referendum passes in March, then you have to go through an RFP process, which I'm assuming would take some months to do. We're probably 10 months out from really knowing the answer to that question, so.
Right. But it still is sort of the low-hanging fruit. I mean, it's something that
Yes.
could be done
It should
relatively
definitely
quickly
be in
and
our
have
strategies.
a huge impact, and it's at the top of our capital list, too. So, I mean, everything is sort of pointing toward that. I just sort of like that emphasized without getting expectations up too much, that, we can just do that and nothing else. I mean, I think it makes a really nice first step if it could be done. And even in switching, there are new technologies now where people are switching from fossil fuels to electricity for home heating, like Ty Newell's place is all electric. There are heat pumps now. There are heat pump type water heaters, all electric, that are really efficient. And all of these things, that would be smacking out all of the fossil stuff and putting it into the electricity side, which would be really nice. And then, of course, the transportation with electric vehicles as well, as we move toward electricity. So it's an attractive package. I hope it's not too attractive.
I know, I kind of feel like I'm trying to, not get my hopes up too high until we find out all the rest of the information. But I guess I would suggest that perhaps where we have the list that Todd has pulled together, that perhaps that just becomes kind of the top of the list, that we're identifying, pursuit of municipal aggregation with the green energy. Well, I guess we can't really require it because of the way the referendum is, but that we would certainly recommend that as the strategy for the city to follow, that they pursue 100% green energy as a key strategy.
To help, if people have comments, email, if they come email to me, so I can work with those a little bit easier. And definitely, one possibility is maybe even putting some additional language other than just these columns and table thing, like putting some additional language to something like the renewable energy credits, something that we really want to emphasize. So one thing I might also add is I may want to get rid of, drop the low-hanging fruit term. I think I may have let that word slip last time. I don't really like it for a whole bunch of reasons. One person's low-hanging fruit requires a ladder. So, anyways.
That's how tall you are.
Steve?
Can you remind me the origin of the climate action principles in this draft? Was this new text, or is it something we adopted as a commission?
Yes, that's actually, that just came out of my head
Okay.
when I was writing the draft, so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I
So-
mean, I based it on our conversations over time.
Yeah, of course. No, I think
But,
they
yeah.
actually are really, they're well drafted, and they do kind of occupy, they help provide direction. I think it's a good list. I don't have refined language, but I want to propose an addition to that. Because the bullets as they are now, essentially, just in a nutshell, they promote energy conservation and efficiency, they promote clean renewable energy, they support green businesses, and they support collaboration with other government entities to reduce greenhouse gases. And I was wondering if we could add to this, the way I drafted this is sort of a grab bag, but I'll just read my scrawl, and maybe instead of I have a motion that we add this bullet and say it exactly right, we just sort of see, because I can't do that.
I think we're okay with doing some informal drafting.
Okay, it's hard for me.
We'll leave the motions for our next meeting when we've got a little bit more of a draft to vote
Some people speak
on.
in perfect prose, but that's not me. And in fact, I don't write in perfect prose either. But so I have a bullet here that's essentially support, downtown development, parks, amenities, transportation infrastructure that improve urbana quality of life and support lifestyles with a reduced carbon footprint. So it would be essentially trying to expand beyond energy conservation measures and clean energy procurement measures to talk specifically about either new urban infrastructure or private sector development, neighborhood redevelopment, transportation, sidewalks, these kinds of things that our citizens can use and enjoy and that are consistent with the low carbon lifestyle that we're trying to promote here. And again, it's not a specific proposal, it's not, but these are principles. So we can say these are the sorts of things that we think are consistent with our plan and that are a direction we'd like to see the city go, that just sort of open up those types of projects for our support and to be promoted by this plan.
I would just suggest that, if we're in agreement that we want to add that, if you could just, when you have time to formulate it a little bit, just shoot an email
Mhm.
with that, with the wording. I jotted down kind of a brief
Okay.
note about it, but
Okay.
other comments on that? Gary?
Just some little specific things. You mentioned bicycle-friendly community. I mean, we got that in 2010, right? So you mentioned it as a goal, but you didn't put down that we got it, so.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Move
The
it to-
bicycle-friendly community, that was one of the council's goals,
Right.
to get that by 2011 or something. We got it in 2010, so we already did that.
That's great.
So that's not in here.
Move it to the right list, I guess.
Just probably, I was actually just gonna, really just, pulling from the reports that we've had over time, and not all of them were up to date. So the accomplishments were taken from the 2008 report.
Oh,
So anything
okay.
that happened after 2008.
Okay,
And I
so-
think that's where Kate was pulling together things that have happened more recently than then.
Okay. I was just pointing that out.
Right. Yes.
There's the city council goals. There have been some updates to that from staff to council, updating them as to what has taken place. So probably a lot of the accomplishments that we can update from the 2000 report can be pulled from those updates to the council. So
Okay.
I can just go back and pull that information from there, and that would capture those things like Gary's pointing out.
Sort of a technical question. I find it really easy now with the new Adobe Reader to make comments and notes on PDFs, and it's free software for everybody. Putting it in Word, I don't even have Word.
Oh, okay.
And I'm using OpenOffice, and it doesn't quite keep up with Word's attempt to get away. So, and it's very hard for me to make comments on
Okay.
electricity. So is that possible for other people too, to go with PDF on this stuff, which
Oh.
is free for everyone, and you can comment on stuff? You could, I'm sure from Word, can you spit out a PDF from Word? So I don't know how other people feel about that, but I'd really like to have everything in PDF.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. I can't, yeah, I find Word to be a little more fluid, but I can, for anything I send out, I can send out both versions. It's not a problem.
Okay. No, you could create the document in Word, certainly, but I'm just
Yeah,
saying
and-
when you send it to people.
Yeah, and I
other
mean,
people-
I've actually got the whole, like, Acrobat Pro and all that stuff.
Oh,
so-
okay. Because we're getting some things now in PDF and some things in Word, and it's just, I like PDF. But only because now the new versions allow me to easily comment and highlight and do all these things. It's really nice.
Have you tried incorporating comments from Adobe? It's hard.
That's why I was asking, so.
Right. Anything else?
Just one
Todd.
thing, and I hope you'll forgive me if it's just too obvious. It'd be really, so the report has a lot of important information. I think it has a bunch of things that we especially want to highlight, and not everyone is going to actually read it. So, maybe if we can have like a one-page thing at the very front, like the highlights that we want to make sure that if you hold this thing, we want to make sure that you read these certain points. Because a
It's an
lot of things,
excellent idea.
can get lost in the pages.
All right. Well, if there's nothing else this evening, then Todd, you're going to rework your list. I'll rework this. I'll expect to see from Bart and Kate the updates to some of the information in here. Try to pull that all together, bring it back in December, and who knows, maybe we'll even have a version that's ready to vote on by then. All right. Okay, we ready to move on to our new business? We need to, with Kirsten rolling off, we no longer have a vice chair, and we need to select a vice chair. So I will open the floor to nominations, including self-nominations. And if there are none, I'm going to nominate somebody. Are there any nominations? And I'm going to nominate Steve. Are there any other nominations? And I think I'm forgetting, I'm not sure if I quite know the Roberts rules on this. Do we just vote, or do we need a motion? I think we need a motion in a second. So, is there a motion to accept the nomination of Steve for vice chair?
Yeah, I so move.
Is there a second? Okay. All those in favor of having Stephen Wald be our vice chair? Yep, okay. Sorry?
So fast.
I'm just trying to ram my candidate through. I don't want any
Making it as
arguments.
painless as possible.
Okay, is there discussion?
These questions, your term ends when and your term ends when? Current term.
I was one of the first to renew my term, but it's been like a year. I think it was last spring that mine renewed. Kate, do you know that?
Yeah, I was just reappointed in June, so I've got close, well,
Okay.
2.5 years.
So you're both relatively fresh then, which is good. Okay. That's good, because if you were going to, be done in a year, and so that's all my discussion.
Is further discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, great. Congratulations, and thank you very much.
Thank you for entrusting me with this high office.
Are there any announcements this evening?
night is tomorrow night with the Cycling Savvy free course as part of Sustainability Week at the university. So if you are cycling or interested, or you know people, there was an article, I don't know people, so Jody Heckel did an article today in the News Gazette on it, which was really well done, I thought. So the question is, in my mind, how many people in their right mind will show up for a 3-hour classroom cycling course? We'll find out tomorrow. But if you're interested in any aspect of cycling, even if you're in law enforcement and planning, whatever, this is something worth seeing. And I took this course in May, and I said I want to be an instructor for this, and I went back to St. Louis in July, and I am. So we're doing it. So university supported it, and away we go. So that's an announcement for cycling.
Great. Steve?
I think tomorrow the university's having an open house and a review of their climate action plan between 1:30 and 3:30 in the Illini Union. The announcement on that asked for RSVPs, but clarified that anyone could show up and participate if they'd like. And I think it's sort of evenly split between just informal displays and discussions about the plan and a plenary session about the plan. I'm planning on attending.
I was going to mention that as well, Steve. It is tomorrow afternoon, Illini Union Rooms B and C. So, and it is Sustainability Week on campus, so that's going on. I think they're tying in Gary's thing as well. Thursday, I'm speaking at a green career panel. So there's several events going on campus this week that are tied into that. Part of the green career panel is also someone from the U.S. Green Building Council is going to be there, and then he's also speaking Thursday evening as well. So that's something else that's out there. I don't remember the exact topic he's addressing, but
I'm curious, do you remember who it is that's speaking?
Chris Pike.
Okay. All right. Other announcements? Okay. Well, seeing no other business before us, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Is there a second? Discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? All right, we are adjourned.